My name is Alexandra Carter. At my sister's promotion party, while the entire room raised their glasses to celebrate the family's new hero, I sat quietly in the corner. No name tag, no greeting. I had grown used to being forgotten. But then the doors opened and a general stepped inside, walking straight through the crowded hall without looking at anyone but me. He stood tall, saluted, and said in a voice that cut through the air like thunder, "Colonel Carter. We've been looking for you." All the laughter stopped. My sister froze. My father dropped his wine glass. Me? I just nodded. Because I knew what they had tried to bury had just come back to life. Have you ever been erased from your own life? Has someone ever made you invisible in the very story you helped write with your own blood? If this story touches something in you, leave a comment below, hit like or subscribe so I can keep telling you the truths they never wanted spoken. I left that party in silence, my footsteps echoing on the tiled floor like each step was holding me upright. No one followed. Not a single voice called my name. But in their eyes I saw something that had never really left in the past 10 years. A fear that didn't have a name. Not fear of me but fear of what I knew. 10 years ago I wasn't the shadow they now tried to ignore. I held the rank of lieutenant colonel and directly coordinated a mission called Ember Wall, a top-secret operation to dismantle a domestic terrorist network embedded across civilian infrastructures in the U.S. I was 30 years old at the time, younger than most officers in that command room, but my record left no room for dismissal. They called me the breathing analysis engine, because I could see risk before it turned to disaster. But what I didn't see, or maybe refused to see, was that the enemy wasn't only on the other side of the battlefield. The operation began with a military intelligence tip, reporting that a chemical facility in Missouri had been overtaken by extremists. The plan was to lock it down fast, secure documents, and arrest key targets. I objected. Satellite maps and signal scans showed signs of children and civilians in the area. It appeared they had moved an orphanage there to use as human shields. I made my position clear in the briefing. We can't move on this order. The risk of civilian casualties is too high. But while I stepped out to contact Central Coordination, my digital command log was altered. My directive, hold fire, maintain perimeter, was replaced with engage per protocol 2B. 30 minutes later, the facility was leveled. 18 people died. 9 of them were children. The press never knew. Civilians were never told. Only one name was underlined in the internal report, LT. Colonel Alexandra Carter. I remember the meeting that followed as if it's branded into my skin. General Vaughn looked at me with steel in his eyes and laid a pre-typed report in front of me. You have 2 options. Sign off that the order was yours, blame it on signal misinterpretation, or the investigation will widen and your entire tactical team will be held accountable. I had no attorney. No time. Just a photo of small bodies attached to the report like a warning shot. I signed. The next morning I received my discharge notice. Technical misjudgment, strategic oversight. I had 2 days to clear out. No farewell ceremony. No folded flag. What I left behind was a name scratched out of the system, a locked military record, and a family that didn't ask why. I remember my father throwing my coat from the second-floor balcony into the yard below. Who do you think you are to disgrace the Carter name? My mother said nothing. She just turned away, her fingers nervously twirling the pearl necklace she'd worn since her wedding day. And Emma, my sister, just stood there, eyes glowing like she'd been set free. That night, I boarded a late train out of base with nothing but a suitcase of clothes, a folder of useless documents, and a heart not broken by the discharge, but by the knowledge that I had been betrayed. I changed my name, cut my hair, disappeared from every contact list. I earned a master's degree in history and started teaching at a small strategic institute in Pennsylvania. No one there knew I had once commanded hundreds, that I had sat in rooms where global maps were colored in with life-or-death decisions. There, I was just Professor Carter, the one who stayed late in the library, who always told her students, "Victory means nothing if it buries your integrity." I told no one about Emberwall. I never mentioned the forged order. I never spoke of the dread I felt when I searched my own name online, and found nothing. 10 years was enough time for me to accept that no apology was coming. No reinvestigation. No one cared to hear from a name erased by its own signature. I lived like someone resurrected by routine. But fate has a way of pulling the past back in. And it began the day I received an invitation to my sister's promotion ceremony. Heavy cardstock, gold-trimmed edges, and words thick with praise. Lieutenant Emma Carter will be honored with the Distinguished Service Commendation for her role in Operation Ember Wall. I held that invitation the entire evening. Not because I was touched, but because of 3 words. Operation Ember Wall. I was once taught that truth never dies. It only goes quiet, until someone brave enough calls it by name again. This time that someone was me. I chose to live quietly on the campus of Hopefield Institute, a place that trained strategic officers for special combat units. Under a new name, Professor Alexandra Lewis, I taught military campaign history and command ethics. My office was on the 3rd floor of an old building, where morning sunlight filtered through the thick limbs of a chestnut oak, casting long, crooked shadows across the faded wood floor. I liked that space. No medals. No clinical reports. Just young faces looking up at me with unshaken belief that the missions they would one day lead were driven by noble cause. They didn't know who I was. And I made sure they didn't. I never mentioned Operation Ember Wall. I carried nothing from my former life. Instead, I lectured on lessons from Operation Overlord, Desert Storm, and the quiet failures that never made it into textbooks. Military ethics, I often said, doesn't live in reports. It lives in the decisions you make when no one's watching. In my class was a student named Noah Reyes. 23, lanky, a little stiff in his salute, but with sharp eyes and a memory that could hold nuance like poetry. He wasn't the top strategist in the group, but he had a gift for seeing through data, like he was reading between the lines of a map others just skimmed. One Friday afternoon after class, Noah knocked on my office door looking unusually tense. "Professor, would you mind reviewing my presentation draft?" He handed me a tablet, fingers trembling slightly. "What's the topic?" I asked, pouring tea into 2 familiar white porcelain cups. I chose to simulate Operation Ember Wall. I found declassified data in the Pentagon's Tactical Archive. There's a new AI tool that reconstructs maps and command flows based on input datasets. I froze mid-pour. "Ember Wall." I repeated, steadying my voice. "Where did you get this?" "Released data from last year." I know it's a controversial op, but I wanted to understand why the map didn't match the orders. "I think there was a glitch in the signal routing." I didn't answer. I simply took the tablet and sat down. On the screen was a real-time tactical map interface. Red marked enemy units. Blue marked ours. A small blinking circle marked the target, a 2-story building near a rural road. Time index read, 4:17 a.m., Operation Trigger. Protocol 2B. Below that in faint gray type, Command Approval, AC. I let go. The teacup tilted and hot liquid spilled across the desk. Noah quickly grabbed a tissue, fumbling to clean it up. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I didn't know whose command that was. I guessed it was just initials." "It's all right," I interrupted, my voice lowering. "You did well to ask the question." Noah hesitated. Do you know who AC is, ma'am?" I stayed silent, staring at the blinking map on the screen. That deadly line of code still shone like an unhealed scar. I had thought I buried it along with everything else. But it turns out things that get buried don't always stay dead. "Can you give me a copy of the map?" I asked, eyes fixed on the display. Noah nodded. I exported the file to an external drive. "It's in the folder labeled Anomalies on the class server. You can use it." I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "Thank you, Noah. But I need you to stay quiet about this for a while. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "You don't want anyone else to know." "It's not because I'm afraid. It's because some truths need the right time and the right people to be heard." That evening, after the campus lights shut off, I sat alone in my office. The Ember Wall map stayed open on my computer screen. I replayed the simulation again and again. The command chains, the communication signals, the strategic positions. Every element pointed to one conclusion. The attack order wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate overwrite. Someone had turned a warning into an execution command. And AC, that name, was the perfect scapegoat. Because only one officer had those initials and had openly opposed the plan. Me. 10 years had passed. But someone was still trying to keep me in the dark. I felt it clearly when I logged into the system and received the alert. Access restricted. Data under review by Military Security Council. Noah had no idea that his project had just touched a still live wire. And I wasn't sure whether to pull him in or let him continue believing this was just a glitch in a simulation. I stood, pulled a key from my drawer. Down the hall was an old archive room where I kept declassified case files and shredded reports. In an unlabeled wooden box, I found the faded duplicate of the original order I had signed, with my signature still visible. But nowhere on the page was there any mention of Protocol 2B. In that moment, I understood one thing with total clarity. If I didn't step up and expose the truth, someone else would be turned into a set of initials, just like I had. And next time, it might be Noah. On Wednesday morning, just as I stepped out of class with a stack of ungraded tests in hand, my assistant rushed over to say someone was waiting for me in the guest lounge. I didn't think much of it. Unannounced visits at the academy were usually alumni or curious parents. But when the door opened and I saw her standing there, back turned, hands clasped in front of her, I knew everything was about to change. Emma. After 10 years, my sister had changed a lot, and also, not at all. Still the same straight, polished hair, flawless uniform, nude-colored nails, and that look in her eyes that made it seem like everything around her was meant to be under control. When I entered, she turned with a soft smile, as if the last time we spoke hadn't been a curt phone call after my public disgrace. "Sis," Emma said, her voice deeper than I remembered, but still touched with that practiced gentleness. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I sat down across from her and nodded slightly. "I didn't expect you. I had a training rotation at Fort Meade. I heard you were teaching here. Thought I'd stop by. And bring this." She opened her purse and pulled out a thick navy blue envelope, embossed with the U.S. Army insignia. I looked at the gold lettering on the front. Official invitation, commendation ceremony for Lieutenant Emma Carter. I took it, didn't open it, just looked at her. Emma shrugged, eyes gleaming as if lit by stage lights. "I didn't think you'd come, but you were a part of my journey after all." "A part of it how?" I asked, my voice even. She gave a small laugh. "Growing up, you were always the fastest, the best at climbing trees, the one who knew all the answers. I grew up in that shadow. But now I've got something of my own." I said nothing. I opened the envelope and scanned the formal document. The bold line at the bottom caught me. Recognized for leading a rescue unit that saved 24 civilians during an explosion in Operation Ember Wall. Commended for performance under exceptional risk. My finger stopped. Operation Ember Wall? I looked up. Emma nodded without hesitation. I was assigned in a support role. But when comms went down, I rerouted the med team west. No one knew there were civilians trapped there. If I hadn't acted, they might have. She paused, trying to appear moved. I set the paper down slowly. "And how did you know how many people were there?" She narrowed her eyes. "Through satellite intel and data from Forward Recon. The same recon team that, according to reports, lost signal 22 hours in?" There was a beat of silence. I looked down, pretending to rearrange the invitation. "And the map you used? Did it show a civilian structure?" "Last I checked, the original mission logs didn't mark any West Zone residential activity." Emma pressed her lips together. "You've been following this mission?" "I was its tactical commander. Remember?" I looked up, no longer hiding my gaze. Her expression flickered, then returned to calm composure. "I had access to some additional files during my advanced training rotation. Maybe that's how I saw details others missed. Those files were classified at the highest level," I said quietly. "Only 5 people had clearance. I was one of them." Emma said nothing. We sat in silence for a moment. I could see every small tension in her face, her lower lip tightening, her eyes glancing toward the window as if looking for an exit. "Emma," I said softly, "if you access those files, you also know they were altered." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe you don't want to know." She stood, regaining her posture. "I didn't come here to argue. I just wanted to bring the invitation. If you come, I'd be glad." I stood with her. "I'll think about it." As Emma walked past me, she paused. Then, almost reflexively, she leaned in and hugged me. It was quick, just long enough for a camera to catch it. But under the soft fabric of her coat, I felt something hard along her left side. I used to carry a mini recorder like that during operations. And no officer wears one to a family visit, unless they intend to record the conversation. Emma let go. Hope to see you at the ceremony. I nodded. If I come, I'll be in full uniform. She walked away without looking back. I stood in my office for a few minutes, feeling like my chest had turned to stone. Sometimes the person who stabs you the deepest is the one who knows every scar. And Emma, my sister, knew exactly where I would fall. I always lock my door carefully each night. My small third-floor apartment in the faculty housing complex doesn't hold anything of value, just a shelf of books, a teapot, a few wooden chairs, and a small safe hidden behind an old, slightly crooked world map. Inside that safe was a black USB drive attached to a fraying silver cord, the only thing I still kept from my past life. It held the data fragments I'd collected on Operation Ember Wall, including a leaked audio clip from an encrypted radio channel. I hadn't opened it in years. But I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. That night, a light rain fell. I came home late after a group discussion with the honors cadets, including Noah. He'd started getting more curious about the command discrepancies in the simulation. When I entered my apartment, the hallway light was still on and everything looked intact. But as I took off my coat, set down my bag, and stepped toward the study, I noticed something off. The cabinet door was slightly ajar, the corner of the map shifting, not from wind. My chest tightened. I rushed over, pulled the map aside. The safe door was closed, no sign of forced entry. But when I entered the code and opened it, the USB was gone. No missing cash. No stolen jewelry. No ransacked drawers. Just one very specific target. I sat down hard, gripping the armrests until my hands went numb. Someone skilled enough to break in without a trace, and knowledgeable enough to know exactly what to take, meant this was no longer a private threat. Someone wanted to erase the last piece of memory I still held. And they didn't need a tribunal or military court. All they needed was to take away the one thing that could prove I wasn't lying. The next morning, when I opened my laptop to check faculty emails, a new message appeared among the meeting invites and newsletters. Sender, randomized address, no name. Subject, don't make us come back. Body, you should have stayed erased. I stared at the screen. No signature. No follow-up. But the message was louder than any formal reprimand I'd ever received. At noon, when Noah knocked on my office door with a folder in hand, I didn't even have time to speak before he quietly shut the door behind him and pulled a portable hard drive from his jacket pocket. I think there's something you need to see, he said, his voice noticeably lower. I gestured for him to sit, turned on the projector, and plugged in the drive. The screen lit up with the familiar simulation interface I'd seen in his earlier presentation, but there was an audio file, one not listed in any official report. I found it in the backup server for the simulation room, Noah explained. It was in a temp folder, flagged as unrecoverable. But the Academy's storage system creates a shadow copy in the background memory. He paused. I was about to wipe all the old data after class, but this file was labeled Tactical Override, Private Transmission. I figured no one below command level could have created that. I said nothing, only nodded for him to play the clip. Within seconds I froze. Switch to Protocol 2B. Repeat, confirm strike on target. Access code, Lima Foxtrot, 3-7, Juliet. A woman's voice. Clear. Precise. Every syllable delivered with the confidence of someone trained in military command for years. But it wasn't mine. It was Emma's. Noah looked at me. Professor, who is that? I stayed silent for several seconds, my eyes locked on the waveform blinking on screen like a living indictment. She's someone who shouldn't be in the simulation database, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Who gave you access to the backup directory? No one. I was just trying to trace the logic error in the simulation and worked backward through the reference data. And the file was there. I exhaled slowly, walked to the window, and gently pulled back the curtain. Outside, the academy lawn looked as peaceful as any other morning. Young cadets moved between buildings, backs straight, polished boots, voices drifting in clipped bursts. No one knew there was a quiet war playing out just a few floors above them. Noah, I turned, speaking carefully. You must not mention this to anyone. Not your classmates, not another professor. Not even family. But if this is doctored evidence, if someone used someone else's command to fake. Which is exactly why you must not speak of it, I cut in. You don't understand how close you are to something dangerous. Keep digging and you won't just lose a project, you could lose your shot at graduating. Or more. Noah fell silent, then nodded slowly. But I'm not deleting the file. I know. He left shortly after, taking the hard drive with him. I stayed behind, wrapping both hands around the cold teacup I'd left untouched since morning. There was something in Emma's eyes the day before. The way she looked at me when I mentioned the inaccurate map, when I spoke of classified access, as if she was waiting to see how much I knew. And now, hearing that recording again, I understood she hadn't just accessed the data. She'd used it to rebuild her image using fragments stolen from mine. Part of me still tried to explain it. Maybe she was pressured or made a mistake. But reason no longer allowed me the luxury of naivety. Sometimes disaster doesn't come from those wearing a different flag. It comes from the ones in the same uniform, the same badge, the same blood, who are willing to throw you into the fire just to step onto the stage. That morning, the Federal Defense Building gleamed under crisp autumn sun, flags fluttering above the marble entrance, guards standing sharp in uniforms, boots shining like mirrors. I climbed the granite steps, clutching the folder at my side, feeling an old, buried rhythm return. Today was the Distinguished Commendation Ceremony for officers recognized for exceptional contributions to strategic missions over the past 2 decades. Emma Carter's name led the program. The description below read, credited with saving 24 lives in a high-risk combat scenario in Missouri. There wasn't a single line about me. No one expected me to be there. But I stood just behind the main hall, holding the audio Noah had recovered, its copy sealed in a secure envelope, labeled like a tactical dossier. I waited for the lights to hit the stage. Emma stepped out in a perfectly pressed lieutenant's dress uniform. She smiled as the audience clapped. My father sat in the second row, clapping slowly, eyes full of pride he had never once shown me. My mother beside him, eyes slightly moist, hands folded neatly over gloved knees. I stepped out of the shadows just as the announcer said, "Please welcome Lieutenant Emma Carter to the podium for her remarks before receiving the Distinguished Commendation." Emma approached the podium, her black shoes tapping gently across the polished wood floor. Her voice rang out, smooth and rehearsed. I didn't think I'd be here today if not for one choice. When I saw the map error, I could have waited for orders. But I didn't. I moved my unit into a risk zone because I believe humanity should always come before tactics. Applause rippled through the crowd. I pulled the envelope from my coat pocket and walked down the center aisle of the auditorium, straight toward the stage. Heads turned. A few officers stood as if questioning their own eyes. Emma saw me from across the room. Her expression shifted from confidence to stunned, then hardened, as if she was trying to convince herself that I couldn't possibly do anything in a room full of power like this. I approached the command table where Lieutenant General Harrington was preparing the medals, and placed the envelope in front of him. "Sir, I'm requesting the board reconsider this commendation. The data inside will explain why." He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "And you are?" "Former Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Carter. Service ID, Delta 37 Charlie." His brows furrowed, eyes alert. But he nodded, opened the envelope and handed the USB to a technical aide. While the tech plugged it into the system and extracted the file, I turned to Emma, now standing barely a step away. Emma shook her head slightly. "You can't do this. Not here." "I didn't choose the place," I said quietly. "You're the one who brought it all into the light." On the large screen behind the podium, the audio began to play. No background music. No effects. Just raw radio feed from an old combat unit. "Switch to Protocol 2B. Confirm strike on Western target. Access code, Lima, Foxtrot, 37, Juliet." A brief silence settled over the room. At first, people thought it was part of a simulation. But when the voice played again, those who had served in Operation Emberwall began to realize that voice didn't belong to any recon commander they remembered. Emma. I didn't need to point it out. Anyone paying attention could hear it. The room, once lit brightly, seemed to dim under the weight of hundreds of eyes turning in one direction. General Harrington raised a hand to stop the playback. His hand trembled slightly as he set the USB on the table. Emma looked at me. Her face could no longer hide the emotion. Her lips quivered. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since before you walked into the hall today." Her voice dropped. "What do you want? To ruin me in front of the entire command? After everything you lost, you just want to drag someone else down?" I looked straight at her, calm. "I'm not dragging anyone down. But you're standing on the ruins of lives that were lost. And you built this stage with your own voice." Emma gritted her teeth. "They erased your name. You're the past. I'm the present. I did what I had to do to survive." Her voice cracked as she said, "It was you or me." I didn't blink. "You chose wrong." Silence stretched. No more applause. No one stood. Just the locked gaze between two people who shared the same last name, the same blood, but stood on opposite sides of an invisible war. An officer from Internal Affairs quietly approached General Harrington and whispered something. He nodded and signaled for two aides to retrieve the equipment. The ceremony was suspended. Guests were asked to leave the hall. Emma remained at the podium saying nothing more. I stepped down slowly, one step at a time, passing the row where my parents still sat like statues. My father looked away. My mother glanced up, eyes filled with words she never said. I didn't stop. No one called my name. No medals. No flags. But also no more lies dressed in gold. And when I walked out through the glass doors behind the hall, the midday sun hit my face like a quiet greeting. Some battles don't require guns or blood, just standing firm and speaking the truth at the right time. Roughly 2 hours after leaving the event, I was summoned urgently to the Academy's Security Coordination Office. But the ones waiting for me weren't local officers as I had assumed. They were 2 military personnel in internal special operations uniform, gray coats with no rank insignia, voices firm, neither friendly nor hostile. "Ma'am Alexandra Carter. By order of the Military Counterintelligence Committee, you are being taken into temporary custody for an investigation into unauthorized access of top-secret systems, in connection with data from classified Operation Ember Wall." They didn't need to cuff me. I walked on my own. No yelling. No protest. Years of service had taught me one thing. When someone reads you your rights, the first thing to do isn't deny. It's to listen to how much they already know. The holding room wasn't cold. Padded chairs, warm white lights, beige walls like a therapist's office. I sat facing a wooden table, a glass of water in front of me, and a camera aimed squarely at my face. About 20 minutes later, the door opened. And I knew I had guessed right about who would walk in. Not Harrington, not Emma, and certainly not someone from the disciplinary board. It was him. General Marcus Vaughn. Same perfectly combed silver hair, gold-stitched epaulets, eyes like blades sharpened by both battlefield and bureaucracy. He didn't sit immediately. He stood there staring at me for what felt like a year compressed into seconds. "I hear you didn't just walk into a ceremony," he said, voice as even as a metronome. "You brought a weapon." "I brought the truth," I replied without raising my tone. He sat down, arms crossed. "Shame. Even truth comes with classified protocols here." I didn't blink. "You weren't there. But you know that order didn't come from me. And I also know you didn't have clearance to access the system that contained that audio. Unless someone else retrieved it for you. A student maybe? What was his name? Noah?" My chest tightened, but I kept my face still. "He's talented," Vaughn continued. "But young. One night in interrogation is all it takes to get him to sign a statement admitting he automated the whole thing. Created a fake file. You know, today's simulation tech is very good at corrupting evidence." I leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on him. "All of this, just to keep your hands clean. Emma was never the end game. She was just useful. A young, ambitious soldier you could control." Vaughn smiled. "You're as sharp as I remember. But sharp isn't enough. If it were, you'd know the most important rule in this machine." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Silence is service. Speak up, and it's suicide." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him like I was weighing a venomous snake, not to see if it would bite but to judge how long the poison would last. "You deleted the files," I said. "You changed the orders. You staged the entire operation to push me out. But you forgot one thing." "You still have a copy?" he asked without a hint of worry. "No. I have memory. And now, others have heard part of the truth." He chuckled softly. And you think a few audio clips will do anything? Get Congress to open an investigation? Cost me my stars? Do you know how many things have been swept under the rug just because they damaged the bigger picture? I stood up slowly, placing both hands on the table. I don't need you to lose your stars. I need people to know the truth. Whether they choose to listen, that's the rest of the battle. Vaughn stood too. His voice was no longer calm. You won't get another chance to speak. We've sealed your office, locked all personal files, suspended your teaching credentials, revoked your military ID. I nodded slightly. You just confirmed you're the one behind all of it. No recording. No witnesses. This isn't a battlefield, Carter. This is politics. He turned toward the door. Just before leaving, without looking back, he delivered one sentence in a voice cold as steel. Silence is service. Speak up and you're done. The door shut behind him like a brutal period at the end of a sentence. I remained standing alone in a soundproof room. No active cameras. No voice to confirm I existed. But I knew clearly, this wasn't the end. This was the part they hadn't counted on. I had survived missions with no way out, and this time I wasn't alone. I was released early the next morning, after more than 14 hours of non-stop questioning by a rotating team of 3, all polite enough not to be called oppressive, yet cold enough to make anyone lose their footing. They had no formal warrant. No clear evidence that I had accessed the system. They just wanted to scare me. Scare me into silence. I returned to my apartment like someone who'd passed through a storm that left no visible wound. Everything inside was untouched. But the backup drive, the lock on my private cabinet, and even the voice encryption module had all been dismantled. When I opened my laptop, the screen displayed one flat line of text. Your account has been disabled by internal security order. I didn't text Noah. I didn't want to pull him in further. But just 3 hours later my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated a few seconds before answering. Professor. It's me. Noah's voice was urgent but not panicked. I found the video. I gripped the phone tighter. What video? The tactical briefing on Day 5 of Operation Emberwall. The original recording. I got it through a temporary storage node on the Jackson Base Training Network. It was buried in a backup file from 8 years ago, saved as a.cml format. I'm not sure why it wasn't scrubbed. I sat down, inhaling deeply. Send it to me. But mask the source. Noah paused. Are you sure you want to release it? If I could find it, others could trace it back. I'm not trying to restore my career, I said, voice low. I just want people to hear the whole truth. So they know who chose silence, who was forced into it, and who paid the price for both. That afternoon, I received an email from a legal officer on the Military Justice Board. A special hearing had been convened, following an internal petition from Hopefield Academy, the very place I once taught. It seemed word of what happened at the medal ceremony had traveled farther than I thought. And among those who remained silent, there were still some who wanted to know what really happened that year. I attended the hearing without a uniform. I wore a plain white blouse, charcoal slacks, no jewelry, no insignia of rank or title. In my hand was a printed dossier containing my written statement, the transcript of the audio file, and still images extracted from the video Noah had found. The conference room wasn't as large as I imagined. Only 6 sat at the head of the table, 3 flag officers, 1 legal advisor, and 2 congressional oversight representatives. Many seats around the room were empty. But I knew behind closed screens there were eyes watching. People who wouldn't show their faces but needed to hear. I stood in the center of the room, hands clasped in front of me. No microphone. No recording. Everything was documented in writing by procedure. One of the officers spoke first, calm and measured. Miss Carter, we're here to hear your statement regarding your role in Operation Emberwall and in light of recently surfaced evidence. You may begin at any time. I nodded. My voice didn't waver. 10 years ago, I was a lieutenant colonel leading the tactical analysis team for Phase 3 of Operation Emberwall. In the Day 5 briefing, I objected to the execution of Protocol 2B because satellite signal data indicated the presence of civilians, including children, near the target zone. I opened the dossier, pulled out the first document. This is the transcript of my recommendation to delay action and verify civilian presence in the area. That recommendation was denied 3 hours later. And in the extracted video from the operations room camera, you'll hear my voice making the case against the strike. I placed a copy of the clip transcript in the center of the table. No one picked it up immediately. I continued. The truth is, I did not authorize the attack. The command was issued by another voice, the one you heard at the ceremony. I don't know how or why my order was changed, but I do know I wasn't the only one who saw those irregularities. Everyone just chose silence. I looked up, meeting each person's eyes. I'm not here to reclaim a medal or clear my name. I'm here to tell a story that was ripped from the records, by the one who lived it. And I'm leaving you the proof. What you do with it is up to you. But if nothing comes of it, at least I wasn't silent anymore. No one spoke for nearly a full minute after I finished. Finally, one of the congressional reps leaned forward and took the copy from the center of the table. The others followed. I returned to my seat. No one ordered my arrest. No ruling was given. And I understood, what mattered most I had already done. For the first time in 10 years, Operation Emberwall was no longer a forgotten campaign buried under classified reports. It now had a voice, a face, and a living presence of the one they tried to bury inside it. I didn't watch the broadcast that night. Partly because I didn't need confirmation anymore. Partly because I've lived long enough to know that what's confessed before a camera doesn't always come from true remorse. But when the clip circulated across the news, General Marcus Vaughn bowing his head, reading a resignation letter with a face like he was swallowing each word, I just stood at my window, teacup cold in hand, eyes resting on the campus lawn glowing under the dusk. A week later, the Military Coordination Board issued an indefinite suspension of all military privileges and command authority for Lieutenant Emma Carter. No trial. No prison sentence. But her career was finished. She was no longer the hero on recruitment posters. And though no one said it outright, I knew. Those same hands that once applauded her now avoided her in silence. I received 3 invitations from the Pentagon in under 10 days. One was to return as Senior Tactical Commander at the Rapid Response Center. One was to serve as Strategic Advisor to the International Operations Commission. And one, less formal but more loaded, an honorary role in rebuilding the military's image for civilian media. I declined them all. Not because I was turning away opportunity, but because I had moved past the need to prove I belonged at any table. I didn't need another office, another wall of medals, or another speech ending in applause. I needed just one thing: to restore what this system had long forgotten. 3 months later, I returned to Hopefield. Not to teach for credit. Not to grade simulation essays. I was invited to found and lead a new program, Ethical Warfare. An academy-wide effort to train the next generation of officers not just to read maps, but to recognize the human lives pulsing beneath those blinking red targets on a radar screen. On the first day I stepped into my new classroom, the whiteboard was still blank, and the students seemed unsure whether they should stand and salute like in a tactical briefing or stay seated like in an open seminar. I simply smiled, pulled a chair to the edge of the desk, and spoke. No microphone. No lecture notes. This class doesn't begin with victory. It begins with a question. What are you willing to lose in order to keep your integrity in a war where the lines between right and wrong no longer exist? Noah was there too. He didn't sit in the front row like he used to. He chose a spot slightly to the right near the window where the light cut through the tree canopy outside. The same look in his eyes, quiet but not timid. He just nodded as I passed. No one knew his role in bringing the truth to light. And I intended to keep it that way, as a silent part of the story. In the days that followed, I began rebuilding the curriculum from scratch. No textbook ever mentions missions that were erased from records. No course guide teaches you how to hold on to your conscience when you're the only one in the room who disagrees. I had to rewrite it all. Every lesson. Every scenario. Every question designed to make students confront themselves before they ever give orders to someone else. One late afternoon, while I was making notes on the edge of a map, Noah walked in. He carried a printed sheet and placed it gently on my desk. Discussion group sign up. I want to lead a session on nonlinear warfare and the ethics of command. If you'll allow it. I glanced at him. You think students will show up? He nodded. If they realize this isn't just about the past, it's about who they'll be in 10 years. I smiled softly. Then we start next week. You lead. He smiled for the first time in weeks. Yes, ma'am. After Noah left, I looked at the page he left behind. Under the bold title, in a small handwritten note in blue ink, he had written, "Not to retell war, but to ensure no one repeats it the wrong way." I folded the page and tucked it into the leather binder I carried every day. Not to archive it, but to remind myself, what has been lost may never be recovered. But if you're lucky, you can pass on what's right, to those who don't yet know that choosing what's right may be the hardest choice of all. The last class of the fall semester took place in the gentle stillness of a windless day. I arrived earlier than usual, wiped the board carefully, straightened every chair and desk, hands unrushed, eyes unburdened. Not because I was nostalgic, but because I sensed something in the room had shifted, not the air but the minds that had quietly begun to mature through reflection. On the board, I wrote 2 bold words, then set down the chalk. Moral courage. I stood there for a moment, looking at them as if looking at myself in a mirror, not with pride, but with gratitude that I had survived long enough to teach this to those who had never stepped into the gray zone. Students entered the room one by one, footsteps softer and more focused than usual. Noah was the last to arrive. He quietly took a seat near the back, placed his notebook on the desk, and looked up, waiting. I glanced at him. No nod was needed. We had walked farther together than the syllabus could measure. I began the class with one question. Let's say you have 5 minutes to make a decision between a plan that ensures your unit a quick win but ignores humanitarian intervention guidelines, and one that means tactical failure but saves innocent lives. What do you choose? No one answered right away. I didn't need them to. I needed them to sit with the question, to feel the cold weight of decision, where there's no perfectly right answer, only the burden of living with whichever one you make. I told them about a soldier who once chose not to fire, because behind the target building was a school. About how that soldier was later reprimanded for lack of decisiveness, but years afterward, a child who survived that day sent a thank you letter to the unknown soldier. I didn't say that soldier was me. I didn't need to. The class ended in an unforced silence. No applause. Just steady, unflinching eyes. I could feel something I didn't have a name for. In that classroom, what I had planted was beginning to take root. After the students left, I began tidying up, gathering notes, collecting pens, shutting off the projector. When I returned to my desk, I found a small folded note placed neatly at the center. No name, no rushed crease. I opened it. Noah's familiar handwriting. You didn't fight to be remembered. You fought to make truth unforgettable. I read it twice, then folded it back and placed it in the leather journal I always carried. It didn't need a reply. Words like that weren't meant for response. They were meant to be lived with. I stepped out of the classroom, locking the door gently behind me like closing a piece of sky no one else had noticed. The hallway was quiet, evening light slanting through the windows, casting golden rays over the old wall of faded mottos. As I walked down the stairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number, no contact saved. You broke the silence. Now others will follow. I paused. No exclamation mark. No well-wishing. Just a sentence, like breath passed through the hidden network of those once forced into silence. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't need to. I only knew that a thread had begun, stretching from my small act outward, farther than I ever imagined. And this wasn't the end. It was the first whisper of something waking. When I stepped out of the building, the sky had turned overcast. A light wind moved across the lawn outside the lecture hall, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the faint sound of young footsteps. I looked toward the training field, where cadets were still running, focused, learning to balance strength with strategy. They didn't know that the ground they crossed was once a place where I stood, commanding, failing, forgotten, and returning, not to reclaim anything, but to make sure no one else had to lose what I once did. And in that silent space, I heard it clearer than ever, the whisper of truth. No longer delivered in orders, no longer printed on reports, but alive, persistent, in the eyes of those who dared to ask and dared to listen. And for me, that was enough. I don't expect anyone to believe me right away. Truth doesn't always ring like a bell. It comes from the scratches, the silences, and the questions no one ever asked. But if you've made it this far, if your heart has ever stirred at the choice between what's right and what's easy, then maybe you're like me. Someone who once stood at a crossroads no one taught you how to cross. I want to know what you think. Not just about me, but about what you've seen, what you've lived, times you stayed silent or chose to speak. What did you trade to keep your conscience intact? Who did you step out of your comfort zone for? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll read every word. Because if there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's that truth can't live alone. It needs witnesses, listeners, and sometimes just one person who believes. If you'd like to continue walking with me through stories that are real about mothers, sisters, families that seem ordinary but carry entire lives unseen behind them, please subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to come. Not to seek light but to make sure it never fades.